was just unbelievable. And I wish you all could hear that lecture. Germany's plan to strangle England was three-pronged. They wanted to attack the shipping lanes by air, submarines, and of course surface ships. And it's in this third category that we find Bismarck and her sister ship Tirpitz, as well as all the other surface raiders, be they large or small. Interestingly enough, Germany had initiated what they called Plan Z in early January of 1939 with the intent of building a fleet to challenge the Royal Navy. It was to have consisted of 10 battleships, 4 carriers, a small number of U-boats, and this was all to be done by 1948. At the start of the war, U-boats were second tier in the Kriegsmarine. Surface ships were still viewed as the way to interdict British shipping, and the head of the U-boat fleet, Dönitz, we'll come back to, but he was not the head of the Navy at this point in time. The first 2 ships the Germans built were Scharnhorst, good-looking ship, 9 guns, 38,000 tons, fast, 31 knots. And her sister ship, I don't speak German, I think it's Gneisenau, hard G, okay, Gneisenau. And then along came Bismarck and her sister ship, Tirpitz. So here we have 4 really big, fast, capable ships. Bismarck, I'm labeling, was a ship lover's dream. She was almost 800 feet long, 49,000 tons, 8 15-inch guns in 2-gun turrets, 12 5.9-inch guns. She had 9 boilers, but strangely enough, 3 propellers. Most capital ships of the day, battleships and carriers, had 4 propellers, 4 main engines. But in this class of ships, the Germans made a conscious decision to reduce the number of engines by 1/4. They just figured it would be cheaper, easier, and better to run a ship with 3 engines than 4. As it turned out, the ship did go fast, so maybe they won that argument. Still could go 31 knots on 3 props. Had a crew of just over 2,000 people, depending, más o menos, on whether there was an admiral with his staff on board or not. Bismarck was commissioned in August of 1940, and if you do the math, she had a fairly short service life. She was only afloat for 8 months. She was a beautiful ship. Here we are, we're looking at her in side view. Oh gosh, get a point. I want to point something out that we'll come back to shortly. This black beam across the ship was her catapult, and it was fixed to the ship. They could not rotate the catapult, but we'll come back to that in a second. But she was just a gorgeous ship. Each of those turrets, I'm guessing, weighed about 3,000 tons. Lots of steel. Her keel was laid in 1936, mid-1936. There's the first keel plate going down. Here we are watching her take shape. I wish I could have been smart enough to be a naval architect, because the idea of making a ship and the 48.63 billion parts that go into the ship, how to get them all right without putting something in that, like Homer, oh, we forgot to put in the whatever. It's a remarkable operation. Lots to do. You can see the barbettes for the secondary guns taking place. And we're getting there. This is the barbettes for the main turrets. She was launched in February of 1939, the year my dad graduated from the Naval Academy. And there he goes. Not a misprint. Her skipper, during the building process, was in a meeting, and someone said, oh boy, she's going to be a great ship. And supposedly the skipper slammed his hand down and said, no ship this fantastic will ever be a she. Under my command, this ship from here on is a he. And from that moment on, Bismarck was a he. Here she is taking shape in June of 40. So much to do. Props and rudders. Interesting, her rudders, instead of going straight down like most ships, were actually at 15 degrees, almost as if they were thinking that maybe they could double as stabilizers. Here she is after being completed, passing through the Kiel Canal in September of 40. And there was no nicer day in the skipper's life than when he takes his ship out of the shipyard. Cute story. I did an overhaul on one of my ships in an unnamed shipyard. And Navy guys call shipyard workers sand crabs. We just do. And in one of the meetings every week, the CEO, it was a naval shipyard, the Navy captain in charge of the shipyard would meet with commanding officers of the ships. And in one of these meetings, he said, "Hey guys, knock off calling my people sand crabs. We don't like it, I don't like it, they don't like it. Please don't do that." So the skipper came back to the ship and told us this. And from that day on, the shipyard workers were laterally moving beach creatures. We thought it was clever. Bismarck's administrative organization, 103 officers, about 1,960 sailors. The crew was divided into 12 divisions along functional lines. First, second, third, and fourth divisions were the main and secondary gunnery batteries. 5 and 6, the small caliber anti-aircraft batteries. 7s were cooks and carpenters. Division 8 were the ammo handlers. 9 were the communicators. And 10, 11, and 12 were the engine room folks, which I'm surmising were boilers, main engines, and auxiliaries, and electrical. She had a good-sized aviation department. Every ship at that time, cruiser size and larger, had aircraft on board so they could scout what was going on around them and to spot the fall of shot from the battleship's big guns. My dad's first tour as a naval aviator was flying spot planes off a battleship. Cranes and catapults were typically amidships or on the fantail. This is an American battleship, and just as an FYI, you can see her catapult here. It can be trained as the ship wants because you always need to have the wind coming at the airplane when you launch to get as many knots of wind over the wings as you can. Here's one of her 4 planes, a little Arado float plane. The ship had 3 hangars. And as I mentioned, her catapult was fixed amidships, and I don't know why the Germans would do this. Engineers that they are, why they didn't put the catapult either on the fantail or as we did on some of our big ships, on pedestals, amidships, but you could still train them to get the wind where you wanted. I don't know how you maneuver a ship to get the wind on the beam without a whole lot of machinations, but that's what they chose. Bismarck was commissioned in late August of 1940 with Captain Ernst Lindemann commanding, the originator of the he. And a great day in the skipper's life, as I mentioned, departing the shipyard mid-September of 1940. Hooray. No skipper likes being in the shipyard. Small point on nomenclature. In the U.S. Navy, our battleship turrets are named with the innovative system of 1, 2, 3, and 4. The Germans had Anton, Bruno, A and B forward. Caesar and Dora were the after 2 turrets. These 2 big constructs are rangefinders. They had a very elaborate set of optics. They had a telescope that was probably 30, 35 feet across, tremendously long baseline, and they could use that to determine the range of the target optically. And the little thing up here to the left is a vent motor exhaust. Okay, how the action unfolded, how Bismarck got to the bottom of the ocean. In mid-May of 41, Operation Rheinübung began, and that is the operation that we're all talking about. Bismarck and her escort, a ship named Prince Eugen, departed Norway to interdict Allied shipping. This followed a previous operation called Operation Berlin that was conducted January, February, March of 41 that saw Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, the two good-looking, slightly smaller ships, sinking 22 ships in 3 months. So that was Operation Berlin. We followed up, or they were going to follow it up with Rheinebong with the two big ships. Here is her escort, Prince Eugen. As I recall, she was the only German capital ship to survive World War II, and she was taken down to the South Pacific and used in the Bikini Atom test. Because the Germans built such good ships, we wanted to see the effect of atomic blasts on battle cruisers and battleships. The German plan was to enter the Atlantic undetected, unopposed, to conduct another commerce raid like Operation Berlin. Little did they know, they never had a chance. The British plan, the Brits knew something was coming. Their plan was to intercept the Germans and attack from the east so that the Germans would be silhouetted against the sun. The plan was to have Prince of Wales, the large British battleship, engage Bismarck, and Norfolk and Suffolk, the two heavy cruisers, to engage Prince Eugen. The German task force was commanded by Vice Admiral Gunther Lütjens, and the British task force by a fellow named Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland. Now I'll bet you nickel that he used to lie in his bunk at night going, "Please let me be knighted, please let me be knighted so I can be Sir Lancelot." I bet it happened. He wouldn't. I'm sure he would never admit it, but I'm sure it did. He had a task force that consisted of battleship Prince of Wales and Hood and 6 destroyers. Okay, here we go. He gets underway on May 22nd from Scapa Flow. And Scapa Flow was the main British home fleet anchorage for many, many years, way up in the Orkney Islands where the water never ever gets warm. And it was here that a German U-boat skipper named Gunther Prien did one of the most audacious raids in history. He took his U-boat into Scapa Flow through all the anti-submarine nets at night, lined up and sank a British battleship named the Royal Oak. 800 and some people died, and then got his boat out again. One of the most remarkable raids of all time. Absolutely incredible. Here is a picture of Prince of Wales, the big battleship of the force. Good news, big new ship. Bad news, big new ship. She had just been completed a few weeks before. In my experience in the Navy, when a ship is newly built, it takes a year and a half to really get the ship where you want it to be. Don't think for a second that shipyards turn out ships that are ready to go. They just don't. It takes a long time to work through your punch list, and just as importantly, to get your crew trained up. Prince of Wales had main engine problems. She had main armament problems. She had shipyard workers still aboard doing the final touches. And the one thing that no skipper wants to have, she had an untrained crew. And this was kind of sad, but not too unhappy an ending. Okay, on the 20th of May, Bismarck is sighted. She got underway, she and Prince Eugen, from Poland here, and they thought they were going to come through these straits undetected. Well, no chance. The Danish coast watchers saw her, a Swedish cruiser saw her. The Swedish cruiser radioed Swedish naval headquarters, reported the sighting, and kind of in violation of their neutrality posture, the Swedes in fact informed the Admiralty, "We just saw Bismarck go by." So the Swedes had their heart in the right place that one time at least. Okay, They go to Bergen, Norway to resupply. They did not take on any, oops, am I getting off here? Okay, they go to Bergen, Norway, and they resupplied, but they did not refuel. And no one to this day knows why. A lone Spitfire recon fighter plane flew over Bergen, took pictures of the ships, made it home, and the cat's out of the bag from yesterday. They now knew exactly where the two ships were. And HMS Norfolk and Suffolk, two cruisers, were sent to the north of Iceland, because now the Brits knew where the ships were. They knew where they wanted to go, just somewhere to the Atlantic. You only have three choices: back through the English Channel, probably not, Iceland, UK Gap, or Iceland, Greenland Gap. A lot of territory to cover, but at least you know the choices are finite. So Norfolk and Suffolk were sent to the north of Iceland to patrol that part of the world. Prince of Wales, Hood, and the destroyers came to the south. Again, lead, departing Scapa Flow, steaming west, and here's the track of Bismarck and Prince Eugen in red. On the 23rd of May, late in the day, Norfolk and Suffolk, only one of which had radar, sighted and tracked Bismarck. They were not to engage the ship because they would have been destroyed very quickly. Small guns, shorter range. Their job was to once maintain contact, keep reporting position, course, and speed for the rest of the RN forces. Here we have everybody steaming parallel courses. The Germans clearing to the southwest, Suffolk and Norfolk paralleling. Now it's about to get hot. Admiral Holland was a gunnery expert, and he knew that Hood had a potentially fatal design flaw, and that was her horizontal armor on her decks was not very substantive. The slabs of iron on her sides was good, but Holland knew that her decking armor wasn't probably up to snuff. Holland turned right to close the Bismarck because he wanted to close that range as quickly as possible, because he knew that at long distances, when you're being shot at by a naval gun, you have to shoot it high, and if you shoot it high, it comes down steeply. And he really wanted to avoid that. So Holland turns right, increases speed to close the Germans. Actually, Prince of Wales opened fire first and hit Bismarck first. Her Alien guns got the first lick in. She hit Bismarck in her forward fuel tanks and her machinery spaces. Captain Lindemann, pretty aggressive guy, asks the Admiral, requests permission to open fire. Admiral doesn't respond. He requests permission a second time. I want to open fire. Nothing from the Admiral. And then the captain is quoted as, "I'm not letting my ship get shot out from under my ass. Open fire." Boom, boom, boom. Bismarck started firing back. And with great effect, Bismarck sinks Hood at 6 o'clock, 6:05 on the 24th. Only 3 men of 1,421 survived. The ship hit, exploded catastrophically, sank within seconds. Only 3 men survived. I'd like to share some thoughts with you about Hood. Hood was known throughout the British Navy as Mighty Hood. She was judged to be just a very special ship in the Royal Navy. She was a gorgeous, good-looking ship. She was laid down in the First World War and was the first of what was to have been a 4-ship class. But when the British won World War I, the last 3 ships of the class were canceled. She was the only ship of the class. And I dare say that had she not been sunk the way she was, we would not know the name of Hood, because her career actually was quite ordinary. Between the wars, she was just another gorgeous ship in the Royal Navy. But it was the way she died that made her famous throughout history. And as we mentioned earlier, her side armor was probably good, but her light horizontal armor left her vulnerable to plunging fire. And here's a picture someone did afterwards. She blew up and sank in literally seconds. Historians have been debating ever since what actually sank Hood. And I suspect we'll never know for sure. But the engineers think that probably one of 6 possibilities, or maybe a combination. An explosion of 4-inch shells stowed outside the magazines. They had loaded a lot of ammunition. They had some of them outside their proper magazine storage space. Maybe they were hit. Perhaps an inboard explosion in one of their 15-inch guns. You all remember probably the USS Iowa had the gun explosion in 1989, I guess it was. Killed 40-some sailors off the east coast of the US. Inboard explosions happened. A shell from Bismarck struck one of her after magazines and just blew the ship apart. Not sure that happened. Now, we'll show you why. Kind of a wild guess. A shell hit short. The shell actually went underwater, struck the hull, penetrated the hull underneath the armor belt, hit a magazine. Number 5, destroyed by her own torpedoes. These ships had torpedo tubes. They had a torpedo magazine. Torpedo warheads are quite large, hundreds of pounds of explosives. If the torpedo magazine were to blow, it would have destroyed the ship, probably. And lastly, fire on the boat deck worked its way down into the magazines. And from everything I've read, I think number 6 is the most plausible. A number of witnesses have said she had been hit aft, there was a fire on the boat deck, and then this happened. We've all seen, firecrackers where you contain powder, it goes boom, and it's just catastrophic very quick. Everyone reported just this tremendous flare, kind of a whoosh come out of the ship, as if it were an uncontained burning of cordite. And I suspect what probably happened is she took her hit aft, there were fires in the ship, the fires worked their way down into the powder magazine, the powder was not contained in the guns proper, and it just blew up like a blowtorch. Here is an actual diagram by one of the senior officers from Prince of Wales who corroborates this, and this is what he saw. And I suspect that's kind of what happened, but we'll never know. Back to Prince of Wales, the battleship. Instantly, Admiral Holland flew his flag in Hood. The admiral was not aboard the battleship. Prince of Wales disengaged from the battle shortly after Hood sank. Serious gun and main machinery problems were still plaguing her. He chose to back out today, fight another day. She'd taken 4 hits from Bismarck, 3 from Prince Eugen. And I gotta feel sorry for this skipper, because senior officers in the Royal Navy, they worshipped Admiral Nelson. These folks grew up on naval history, and to be the first naval commander in a long time to willfully disengage from the enemy when you had a kind of functioning battleship beneath your feet must have hurt this guy. But given what he was up against, I can't fault the man. I think better to fight tomorrow than die today needlessly. Okay, so this time it was decision time for Lutjens, the admiral of the German gang. What to do? Bismarck was damaged, running low on fuel. We got to head to a shipyard and get the ship repaired. Lindemann recommended Norway. Lutjens wanted to go to France, Saint Nazaire, for repairs. Had they gone to France, or if they went to France, the nights would have been longer, U-boat coverage would have been better, and it would have been a much shorter trip back to the Atlantic to engage the merchants once the repairs were completed. Okay, so Lindemann sought permission to follow and finish off Prince of Wales, but Lutjens said no. The skipper asked again, "Let me go finish off Prince of Wales," and was told no a second time. So Lindemann's an aggressive guy, Lutyens perhaps a little bit more cautious. But it could also be said that Lutyens perhaps had a strategic mindset where the skipper had a more tactical, shorter-based mindset. On the afternoon of the 24th, Bismarck turns into the British chasers and tells Prince Eugen, "Clear to the southwest, carry out your mission, go sink merchants, and leave me to my luck." HMS Victorious, an aircraft carrier to the southeast of all this, launches torpedo planes. Of the 9 launched, only 1 gets a hit, and it was of no major consequence. But again, Bismarck took a torpedo hit. Bismarck then makes a 270-degree turn to starboard from heading to the southeast, does a 270-degree turn, and kind of confounds the British. They think that this confirmed their thoughts that, oh, she's headed for Norway now. Inexplicably, the Germans break radio silence, and Lutyens files a long radio report back to headquarters telling what had happened that day. The Brits are able to triangulate the report. They fix their position very accurately, but in the fog of war, the folks on King George V plot this improperly. KG-5 is another ship in the fleet, and the Brits lose 7 hours before they figure out they had plotted this wrong. Bismarck had a 7-hour head start in her evasion. Like the Germans, the Brits are now low on fuel and they have to go home. Victorious, the carrier, Bismarck, the single ship without the label. So things are starting to close in though on Bismarck. On the late the 25th, Victorious comes from the southeast still, launches 9 more torpedo planes, get a hit on Bismarck. And then a PBY Catalina, interestingly flown by an American naval officer, discovers or rediscovers Bismarck early in the 26th. The noose is tightening. Here we go. Force H is a force that's coming up, yet a second force coming up from Gibraltar, commanded by an Admiral Vice Admiral Jim Somerville, flying his flag in Ark Royal. Ark Royal closes the action and launches a squadron of string bag torpedo planes, which I'll show you next, with newly developed magnetic detonators on their torpedoes, the latest and the greatest. Good news, the magnetic detectors or exploders did not work. They actually launched on the Sheffield, and all their torpedoes missed or malfunctioned. Holy moly. This is the standard British torpedo plane in the early war. Fairy Swordfish. I read someone where one of the pilots said it was the easiest plane in the world to fly. You took off at 85 knots, you cruised at 85 knots, you made your attack at 85, and you landed at 85. But these folks were the real heroes. But 9 torpedoes in the water, not one of them missed. They went back to the ship, rearmed with contact detonators, went back out and got 2 hits, one of which jammed Bismarck's rudder. But can you imagine sitting in an 85-knot breeze and it's probably 15 degrees outside? These guys were something else. Okay, the noose is really getting closer here. Bismarck in the middle, King George V, Norfolk, Dorsetshire, and HMS Rodney. Prince of Wales has cleared the action. Not where you want to be. Early morning the 27th, King George V and Rodney fired over 700 main battery rounds, 16-inch projectiles, many at point-blank range. In all, the British fired roughly 2,800 rounds at Bismarck, and they figured they got 400 hits. which is actually a pretty good percentage. In naval warfare, gunfire control is pretty tough. 1 round in 7 hitting the target's pretty good by naval standards. 400 hits we figure we got on her. Again, the Brits were low in fuel. They were concerned about U-boats in the area. The admirals ordered the battleships home and ordered HMS Dorsetshire cruiser to close in and finish off Bismarck with torpedoes, which she did. And Bismarck sank at 10:40 on the 27th of May, only 8 months into her own operational career. Dorsetshire picked up 85 men, Maori 25, a U-boat in the area, later closed, picked up 3, and a German trawler 2. Only 115 of her 2,000 plus men lived. I want to show you this ship only because I think the configuration is so interesting. She was one of 2 ships. This is Rodney. I mean, the actual pictures of Nelson, the other ship, you can see on her turret. But these are the only battleships ever made that had all of their guns forward of the superstructure. And as it turns out, having that much weight over that short a distance in the ship created all kinds of torsion and bending problems in the hull later on, but of course they didn't know that when they were building the ship. But here she is at anchor. And this next picture I'm going to show you, just because it just shows, can you imagine bringing your ship into 9 guns that size, pointing at you? Just incredible. Rodney has a distinction. She got so close to Bismarck, she actually engaged Bismarck with her own torpedoes, and it's the only time in history that one battleship was torpedoed by another. In the aftermath of the action, the Admiralty, the British Admiralty, wanted to court-martial Captain Leach of Prince of Wales for not aggressively pursuing the action, but his big boss stood by him and said, you know, disengaging was the right thing to do, and Captain Leach's career was preserved, and sadly, he was lost in Prince of Wales when Prince of Wales and Repulse were sunk by the Japanese in December of 1941 off of Singapore. And here's my last picture of the action. And here's a picture of Bismarck engaging Prince of Wales. There were a few people on deck taking pictures. And here's the last known picture of Bismarck actually firing. I'm going to end up on a little human interest story. The number 2 guy in the German Navy at the time was a fellow named Karl Dönitz. He was the head of the submarine arm of the Kriegsmarine. And I usually do this at my Battle of the Atlantic presentation, but since you're not going to hear it, I want you to hear it this time. He was a cold-hearted son of a gun. He told his U-boats, take no prisoners, don't give them any help, sink them, kill them, get out of the area, don't help anybody. He didn't tell anyone to shoot people in the water, but as some U-boats did, that was not his direction. But he was a cold-blooded son of a gun, and unknown to many, he was actually the head of state after Hitler. When Hitler killed himself, Dönitz was the head of the German state for about 4 weeks before the surrender. Now, for those of you who follow European history, you probably remember that the great families of Europe all intermarried. Cousins, married daughters, married sons. And it wasn't because the kids loved each other, but it was because the scheming parents wanted alliances. If my daughter married his son, then he likes him, that doesn't he. And it was just a big web of intrigue. So people were marrying each other's sons and daughters. In the late 1920s, Admiral then Commander Dönitz's second son was born, and Admiral, I keep saying that, then Commander Dönitz named him for one of his own cousins in Scotland, whose name was Duncan Angus Seamus McLaren, a picture of whom I found. And then, as you can surmise, for the rest of this young man's life, he was known as Dunkin' Donuts. Folks, thank you very much.